But it's interesting to think back to the Clone Wars and come out on the other side thinking, wow, Yoda's been planning this whole time. What's up, Squadron 7? Welcome back to another video. In this video, I wanted to talk about how the Rise of Skywalker paid off a narrative that was set up all the way back in the Clone Wars and the prequel trilogy. The concept of all the Jedi, or communing with all of the Jedi and using their power to defeat Sidious in the end, is a strange one, a convoluted one, and something that a lot of people are confused about. And I've managed to kind of put two and two together and sort of connect the dots and actually come out on the other side understanding this narrative or this plot point or concept that was introduced in the Clone Wars and in the prequels, and it actually kind of pays off what was started in the original trilogy. Now, the earliest time that we can attribute the Force Ghost technique was in A New Hope, with Obi-Wan Kenobi hinting that if you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you could possibly imagine.
You can't win, Darth. If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine.
Now, after we finished the original trilogy, we knew that they could become Force Ghosts and they can revisit people and continue to guide them, but we never really saw that pay off. The closest thing to a payoff was at the end of Return of the Jedi, when we saw Yoda, Anakin, and Obi-Wan at the end as Force Ghosts. But what was the meaning of I shall become more powerful than you could possibly imagine? Now, one could deduce that he just meant, oh, he's just going to persist through death. But as I watched the Clone Wars and as I watched the sequel trilogy unfold, and as I saw the ending of The Rise of Skywalker putting an emphasis on all of the Jedi helping Rey, instead of Rey being the sole victor in the end, I began to question what this meant, and it led me back to that line from Obi-Wan Kenobi. And then I referred back to Clone Wars, and in the Clone Wars, this happened.
Yoda. Hear you, I do. Who are you? It is I, Qui-gon Jinn. I am part of the living force, Yoda. Open to us, a path remains. That unknown for the Sith is. Through this path, victory we may yet find. Not victory in the Clone Wars, but victory for all time.
That was Yoda speaking to Mace Windu and Obi-Wan Kenobi after learning about the Force Ghost technique from the shamans who taught Qui-gon Jinn. He speaks about a path unknown to the Sith that would eventually lead them to victory. Not victory in the Clone Wars, but victory for all time. And when I connect these dots, and when I put this entire narrative together, I feel like the Rise of Skywalker using all of the Jedi in the end to help Rey defeat Sidious was in fact part of the plan. Now, I don't know if they were planning this from the beginning, but it's certainly a great coincidence, a happy coincidence, because it's such a huge payoff for something that was started way back in the Clone Wars. So my interpretation of all this is that Yoda had put this plan in place ever since learning about Force Ghost. He communed with Qui-Gon, he learned about the Force Ghost technique. He goes on to tell Obi-Wan, listen, I learned about this, your old master learned about this, I have some training for you to do while you're on Tatooine, and I need you to do it.
In your solitude on Tatooine, training I have for you. An old friend has learned the path to immortality. One who has returned from the netherworld of the Force, your old master.
Qui-Gon.
And so when I put all the pieces together, it seems like everything came down to this. Now, while the Jedi had the prophecy of Anakin bringing balance to the Force and killing Sidious, and he did do that, it was a clone that survived. The Sith also had a prophecy of the DYAD bringing balance to the Force, and that was Rey and Ben. But this is such a meta narrative that I never saw coming, because while I'm watching the sequel trilogies, I'm not necessarily thinking about things that they thought of in the Clone Wars and in the prequels. And I think this is actually a hugely intelligent narrative to pay off. And so in the end, I think the plan all along from Yoda was first to have Obi-Wan learn the technique, and then have Kanan Jarrus and all of the Jedi that survived Order 66 learn this technique, whether he communed with them or, Force communicated with them through telepathy. He had them learn this technique so that in the end, they could lend their power to a vessel strong enough to stop the Sith. A vessel that was created to contain the power of the Sith, which was Sidious at the time, and that vessel was Rey. And in the end, all of them came together and gave Rey their strength so that they could defeat Sidious and lead to victory for all time. Now, whether or not that leads to victory for all time, that's totally up to interpretation, because we don't know what happens after the Rise of Skywalker, but it's interesting to think that this was Yoda's plan the entire time, especially when thinking about in The Last Jedi, when he's teaching Luke about failure, and he's like, listen, she has everything she needs, we'll be fine. And he's all kind of like jovial about it with Luke, and he's just not worried in the slightest. So whatever you think of the sequel trilogies, love them or hate them, I personally enjoyed them, but I do have my criticisms of them. It's fun to think that there's a lot of things that they're pulling from Legends, EU, the Force Dyad of Bastilla Shin and Revan and Mitra Surik and Kreia. There's a lot of Legends being pulled from, and I find it funny how some fans think that they have completely thrown out all of EU. But it's interesting to think back to the Clone Wars and come out on the other side thinking, wow, Yoda's been planning this whole time. In any case, that'll do it for this video. If you learned something, if it makes sense to you, leave a like, subscribe, share it with all of your friends who are still confused about how all of the Jedi somehow came back in the end to help Rey. And I will see you in the next one. But as always, may the Force be with you.